Rembrandt, a name that just, it conjures up images of golden light, deep shadows, and these incredibly raw human faces.
Absolutely. But behind that mastery of light, there was a life lived almost entirely in the shadow of, well, debt and personal tragedy.
And that's exactly what we're here for. Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we sift through the sources to give you the context, the real story that turns information into understanding.
Today we're taking on Rembrandt Harmenszoon van Rijn, who is, you could argue, the absolute central genius of the Dutch Golden Age. And the sources, they really present this phenomenal conflict.
A conflict. How so?
You have an artist who reaches these unimaginable peaks of fame and success, but he's constantly, and I mean constantly, being sabotaged by his own personal chaos and his just total financial recklessness.
That tension is our mission today. We're not just here to admire the paintings. We want to try and understand the man who made them and the sheer amount of work. It's just staggering.
It is. Even after centuries of scholars debating what's real and what's not, we're still looking at an estimated 300 paintings, 300 etchings, and hundreds of drawings.
That's not a career, it's an eruption.
It truly was. And what really sets Rembrandt apart from, almost all of his contemporaries in the Dutch Republic is his ambition.
Because they were all specialists, right? You painted ships or you painted flowers.
Exactly. The Dutch art market was all about specialization. But Rembrandt, he refused to be put in a box. He did it all.
He didn't specialize, he just consumed everything.
He really did. He tackled portraits, self-portraits, massive historical and biblical scenes, mythological subjects, landscapes, genre scenes, even animal studies. He essentially built his own artistic universe.
And that range is the perfect way in, isn't it? You can look at an early portrait, and it's so smooth, so detailed. And then you see a late work like The Return of the Prodigal Son, and the paint is just, it's thick. It's almost like sculpted earth.
You're watching an artist reinvent himself time and time again.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's trace his journey from a miller's son to, well, a self-proclaimed genius.
Our story starts in the city of Leiden in the Dutch Republic. He was born on July 15th, 1606. And the sources are really careful to point out, this was not some story of rags to riches. His family was quite well-to-do.
His father was a miller, his mother a baker's daughter. Solid professions. It meant they had some stability, and maybe more importantly, they could afford an education for him.
A good education. He went to Latin school, and then in 1620, he was even enrolled at the University of Leiden.
Which is a big deal. It suggests his parents had, academic hopes for him, not just a craftsman's life.
But Rembrandt had other ideas. He pretty quickly decided that his true calling was painting, so he left the university.
He chose the studio over the lecture hall. And that desire for technical skill, that's what drove his early training. He spent 3 years with a local painter, Jacob van Swanenburg.
Learning the basics, but the real turning point, the thing that really shaped him, was a brief, really intensive 6-month period in Amsterdam.
With Peter Lasman.
That's the one. In 1625, Lasman was a history painter known for these big, dramatic, almost theatrical compositions. He'd been to Italy, and he brought back that high drama, that intense light and shadow you saw in artists like Caravaggio.
So Lasman taught him how to tell a story on a grand scale.
In a way, yes. He taught him how to stage a complex narrative, and Rembrandt just absorbed it all. He takes that knowledge back to Leiden, and in that same year, 1625, he opens his own studio with his friend, Jan Lievens.
And he's immediately successful. By 1627, he's not just working, he's taking on students. He's only 21 years old, and he's already teaching the next generation, including Gerrit Dou, who would become a famous master himself.
That speaks to his confidence, doesn't it? But his momentum really skyrocketed because of one key connection.
Constantijn Huygens.
Constantijn Huygens, the statesman, the collector, maybe the most influential cultural figure in the Netherlands at the time. He basically discovered Rembrandt and Lievens around 1629.
And Huygens wasn't just a critic. He was the advisor to the royal court.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So when Huygens championed him, it meant commissions, important commissions, directly from the court of The Hague, purchased by Prince Frederick Hendrik himself.
So before he's even 25, he's basically validated at the highest level of Dutch society. He's painting for royalty.
It's an incredible start, which brings us to a fascinating aha moment, something that reveals his ambition, and it's hidden in plain sight, his signature.
Okay, let's break it down. His full name is Rembrandt Harmenszoon van Rijn. Harmenszoon means son of Harman.
A patronymic, exactly. And von Rijn means from the Rhine, which is just geographic.
But how he used those names tells a story.
It really does. If you look at his earliest works, he signs with just an R, or RH, for Rembrandt Harmenszoon. Then he adds an LRHL.
L for Leiden?
His hometown.
Right. He's documenting his identity, his family, his origin. But then around 1632, 1633, everything changes.
He drops the initials, and he starts signing with just his first name. But he changes the spelling.
He does. He had been signing Rembrandt. Now he adds a D. Rembrandt. And that D is silent in Dutch, isn't it? It serves no purpose phonetically.
None whatsoever. It's purely a visual choice. And scholars are pretty much united on this. It was a deliberate act of self-elevation. It was branding.
It's a power move. He's saying, I don't need my father's name. I don't need my city. I am simply Rembrandt.
He's putting himself on the same level as the great Italian masters of the Renaissance.
Raphael, Leonardo, Michelangelo.
Exactly. They only needed one name. It signified a kind of universal, timeless genius. And here's this young man from Leiden staking that same claim for himself in the Protestant North.
That is incredibly arrogant. I mean, you think about the cautious Calvinist culture of Amsterdam at the time. Wasn't that seen as just unbelievably pretentious?
I'm sure some people thought so, but you have to remember the market was following his lead. The commissions were flying in, the court was buying his work. Arrogance gets forgiven when you can back it up. And he could.
So this self-rebranding is really the prelude to his next big move.
It is. Leiden was great, but the real money, the real center of the universe was Amsterdam. And by the end of 1631, Rembrandt had moved there.
And Amsterdam in the 1630s is just exploding. It's the engine of global trade, fortunes are being made, and he steps right into that world and becomes the go-to portrait painter.
This is him at the absolute peak of his commercial success, and his personal life is flourishing too. In 1634, he marries Saskia van Eulenburg,
who was the cousin of his art dealer, which was a savvy move.
a very savvy move. And the Saskia wasn't just anybody. She came from a very respected, wealthy family. Her father had been a burgomaster, a mayor. This marriage cemented his social standing. That same year, he becomes an Amsterdam citizen, joins the guild. He's arrived.
And with that arrival comes a desire for, well, the symbols of success. Specifically, a house.
A magnificent house. In 1639, they move into this grand, newly modernized home on the Breestraat. And this is where the seeds of his future financial disaster are planted.
Because it was expensive.
Astronomically expensive. 13,000 guilders. He took out a massive mortgage that would basically hang over him for the rest of his life. It was a complete overreach. His ambition outran his cash flow.
What's really interesting about that location, though, is that the Breestraat was rapidly becoming the Jewish quarter of Amsterdam.
Yes, and the sources tell us he was a frequent visitor among his new neighbors, often seeking models for his Old Testament scenes. It shows his commitment to a kind of lived-in authenticity for his biblical work.
But while his professional life is soaring, his home life becomes just brutal.
The 1640s were incredibly difficult. He and Saskia had 4 children, but 3 of them died just weeks or months after they were born. Rembrandt and then 2 daughters, both named Cornelia.
Just an unimaginable cycle of hope and loss. Only their 4th child, a son named Titus, born in 1641, survived into adulthood.
And then the final blow. In 1642, the very same year he completes his masterpiece, The Night Watch, Saskia dies, probably from tuberculosis.
The irony is just staggering. The peak of his public career coincides exactly with his deepest personal tragedy.
It's heartbreaking, and you can see that grief in his art. The drawings he made of Saskia on her sickbed, they're so raw, so intimate. They are documents of a private sorrow.
After Saskia's death, his personal life gets very volatile. He needs someone to care for the infant Titus, so he hires a woman named Geertje Dirks as a nurse.
And she soon became his lover, but the relationship just completely fell apart. By 1649, Geertje is suing him.
For what?
Breach of promise. She claimed he had promised to marry her, and to add insult to injury, she pawns a diamond ring he'd given her, a ring that had once belonged to Saskia.
And this is where we see a really dark side of Rembrandt.
A very dark side. He fights back, and he fights dirty. In 1650, he conspires with Geertje's own family to have her committed to a women's house of correction, basically a workhouse asylum.
He'd had her locked up.
He did. He paid for it, and the records show he took legal steps to make sure she stayed there for as long as possible. It's ruthless. He was protecting his reputation and, crucially, his finances.
While all this legal drama is happening, he's already moved on. He starts a relationship with his maid, a younger woman named Hendrikje Stoffels.
They have a daughter together, also named Cornelia, in 1654, but they could never marry.
Why not?
Money. It always comes back to money with Rembrandt. Saskia's will stipulated that if he remarried, he would lose his inheritance from her trust fund, which was held for their son, Titus.
So he protected his son's inheritance, but he let Hendrik J. face the consequences.
He did. The Reformed Church summoned her for living in sin, for acts of a whore with Rembrandt the painter. She was publicly shamed and banned from receiving communion.
And all this personal chaos is happening just as the financial walls are closing in.
By the mid-1650s, that huge mortgage and his spending habits finally caught up with him. He was a compulsive collector.
Right, it wasn't just the house. He bought art, prints, rare books, Roman statues.
Yeah.
An inventory of his collection lists over 360 items. He was trying to buy the entire world.
And it drained him dry. By July 1656, he had no choice. He declared insolvency, he went to the High Court, and surrendered all his assets.
It's important to note this wasn't a forced bankruptcy. It was a legal maneuver called cessio bonorum.
Right. It was a way to protect himself from being thrown into debtor's prison. It was a strategic surrender. But the consequences were still devastating. His magnificent house was sold at auction. His entire beloved collection was sold off. He lost everything.
He and his family had to move to a much more modest, rented apartment in a working-class neighborhood. He was stripped bare.
But here is where you see this incredible ingenuity. In 1660, once the bankruptcy was all settled, Hendrikie and his son Titus formed a company.
A dummy corporation.
A dummy corporation. It was an art dealership. And under Dutch law, this company then hired Rembrandt as an employee.
So he was on salary from his own family.
Exactly. He was provided with board and lodging by the business. It was this brilliant legal workaround that shielded any new income he generated from his old creditors. He could keep painting, but the money flowed through the corporation, where it couldn't be seized.
It's just incredible to be able to create art amidst all that. The legal battles, the deaths, the public humiliation. It's a testament to his focus.
It is. And it's in this period of supposed ruin that he creates some of his most profound and moving works.
Okay, so let's get to the art itself. How did he do it? What was his philosophy?
We actually have a clue from a letter he wrote to that same Constantine Huygens. It's one of the only times he ever wrote down his artistic goal. He said he was striving for the greatest and most natural movement.
Which in Dutch is the meeste en de natuurlijkste bewegelijkheid.
And that word, bewegelijkheid, that's the key. It doesn't just mean physical movement. It's interpreted as emotion, or even the psychological motive behind an action.
So he wasn't interested in just painting what something looked like. He wanted to paint what it felt like.
Precisely. He was after the soul of the subject. And his main tool for that was light, that dramatic contrast of light and shadow, chiaroscuro. He gets that from the Italians like Caravaggio, but he makes it his own. He uses it to explore the human spirit.
And his presentations are always so alive. He hated that rigid, formal style you see in so many Dutch group portraits. He wanted movement, drama, and a real sense of compassion for people.
He even used his own family as models for these grand stories. Saskia, Titus, Hendrik V, they all appear in his biblical and mythological paintings. He grounds these universal tales in his own intimate world.
It's probably helpful for listeners if we break down his painting style into, say, 3 big phases.
That's a great way to look at it. So phase 1 is his early smooth manner when he's in Leiden.
This is the very fine, detailed work.
Meticulous. He's using fine brushes, creating these incredibly illusionistic surfaces. He's showing off his technical skill, painting every little detail in the lace and the jewelry. It's almost photographic.
Then phase 2, the Amsterdam Baroque of the 1630s.
This is when he's at his most successful and, you could say, his most theatrical. He's competing with international superstars like Rubens. So he's painting these huge, high-contrast, dramatic scenes like the blinding of Samson, big, bold, and full of action.
And then phase 3, the late rough manner from the 1650s onwards. This happens right around the time of his financial collapse.
And it's a radical change. He completely abandons that fine, detailed style that was so fashionable. His colors get richer, deeper, and his brush strokes become thick, pronounced. He's applying paint in these heavy layers, what we call impasto.
It looks almost like he's sculpting with paint.
He is. The sources say he might have been looking at the late work of the Venetian painter Titian, who also used a looser brush, but Rembrandt takes it to another level.
He's using the physical texture of the paint to create the illusion of form and space. The paint literally catches the light.
But you have to wonder, this style was completely out of fashion at the time, wasn't it? Weren't his clients looking for that smooth, polished finish?
They absolutely were. Contemporary critics called his late style coarse. There's an anecdote that he had to tell visitors not to stand too close to his paintings because the magic only worked from a distance.
So he was choosing his own artistic path over what the market wanted.
Which is why that Dumby Corporation was so brilliant. It gave him the freedom to paint exactly how he wanted without having to please a client.
Let's talk about the self-portraits. Because if there's one constant through all these phases, it's him looking at himself.
It's a visual autobiography, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are over 40 of them. We see him as a cocky young man, then a successful master, all the way to this weathered, incredibly profound old man at the end of his life.
And there's a compositional trick he uses again and again. Watch for it when you look at them. He often angles his face so that the ridge of his nose becomes the dividing line.
The dividing line between light and shadow.
Exactly. One side of the face is brilliantly lit, the other is in deep shadow. He forces your eye to that exact point where clarity meets mystery. It's a way of engineering the light to create psychological depth.
Okay, we can't talk about Rembrandt without talking about the Night Watch. It's probably his most famous painting, commissioned in the early 1640s for a civic militia group.
And it was a complete departure from tradition. The standard for these militia portraits was, well, it was boring, a bunch of guys lined up in a row, all equally lit. It was a status symbol.
And Rembrandt just blew that up. Instead of a static lineup, he gives them an action scene. The captain is giving the order to march. A musket is being fired. It's chaotic and alive.
He's blending group portraiture with history painting, which was considered the highest genre of art. It's incredibly ambitious.
We should probably correct a common misconception, though. It's not actually set at night.
No, it's not. The name The Night Watch was given to it much, much later. The dark, gloomy look is just the result of centuries of dirt and old yellowed varnish. It's actually a daytime scene.
And it used to be even bigger, right?
Yeah, much bigger. It was trimmed down on all sides in the 18th century to fit between two doors in the Amsterdam town hall. So the composition we see today is actually a bit off balance from what he originally intended.
His genius wasn't just limited to paint, though. He was just as revolutionary as a printmaker.
An absolute master of etching. He made prints for most of his career, right up until his bankruptcy when he had to sell his printing press. And he was a true innovator.
He wasn't just etching. He was using other tools, like the burin and dry point, to get different effects.
He was experimenting constantly. With the paper he used, he loved this expensive, warm-toned Japanese paper. And with the ink itself, he developed a technique called surface tone.
What's that?
Instead of wiping the copper plate perfectly clean before printing, he would leave a very thin atmospheric film of ink on the surface. It gives the final print this incredible richness and moody depth.
It's like the printmaking equivalent of his shadowy paintings.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. And you see him evolving. His late prints, like the Three Crosses, are just astounding. He would rework the copper plate over and over again, creating different states of the same image. In the final version of the Three Crosses, he plunges the entire scene into this dramatic, almost apocalyptic darkness.
He just couldn't leave well enough alone. He always had to push it further.
And this brings us back to his collecting. There's a fascinating cross-cultural influence in his later work, the Asian connection.
He was interested in Mughal miniatures from India.
Deeply interested. We have around 23 drawings that he made, copying these miniatures, studying the costumes, the figures like Shah Jahan, and you can see that influence creeping into the exotic dress and details of his later biblical paintings. His visual world was truly global.
So you have this artist who is just a sponge. He's taking from Italian drama, Northern realism, Japanese paper, Indian miniatures, and forging it all into something completely his own.
And that complexity, that constant experimentation, is what makes studying him today so challenging. This leads us into the modern scholarship and the science of art.
Right, because with an artist who had such a large workshop, how do you know what's really by him and what's by a student?
It's a huge problem, and it's a problem he created. He encouraged his students to copy his work. That's how they learned. And sometimes he would touch up a student's painting and sell it as his own.
So you have a mix of originals, authorized copies, and just very talented followers who mastered his style.
It created a mess, which is why in 1968, a group of scholars started the Rembrandt Research Project, or RRP. Their mission was to use modern science X-rays, pigment analysis, infrared imaging to try and sort it all out.
And their findings. They sent shockwaves through the art world.
They did. The number of paintings accepted as authentic Rembrandts was basically cut in half. It went from over 600 down to around 300. Museums all over the world had to relabel their prized possessions.
And it created these fascinating controversies, like the Polish writer in the Frick collection.
A masterpiece. For centuries, everyone agreed it was Rembrandt. Then the RRP came along and suggested it might be by one of his students, Willem Drost.
But the Frick didn't change the label.
They didn't. And since then, the scholarly consensus has actually swung back, and most experts now believe it is by Rembrandt after all. It just shows you that even with all the science, there's still room for debate. It's not a settled science.
Unlike something like The Man with the Golden Helmet. That was once one of his most famous portraits.
And now it's almost universally accepted as being by a very talented follower, not the master himself. So the process works, but it's always evolving. New discoveries are still being made.
Let's finish up with where you can see his work today. Because for the quintessential Dutch master, his art is surprisingly spread out.
It really is. And you might be surprised to learn which country holds the most of his paintings.
It's not the Netherlands.
It's not. It's the United States. There are 86 authenticated Rembrandt paintings in the U.S., thanks to the huge collecting boom by American industrialists in the Gilded Age.
Followed by Germany, the UK, and then his homeland, the Netherlands.
Right. But while the paintings are scattered, his graphic works, the prints and drawings are much more concentrated. The big collections are in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the British Museum, and the Louvre.
And here's one last incredible detail. As of the 1980s, 79 of his original copper etching plates still existed. People were still pulling prints from them in the 19th century.
It just speaks to the enduring power and value of his physical legacy, long after the man himself was gone, buried in an unmarked, rented grave.
So we started this deep dive with that central conflict in Rembrandt's life. The unparalleled artistic genius living side by side with this chaotic reality of personal tragedy and financial ruin.
And yet it's out of that chaos that his greatest work emerges. His final self-portraits, like the one he painted in 1669, the year he died.
They're just masterpieces of psychological honesty. You're looking at a man who has been through it all. So here's the final thought for you to consider. We know his life fell apart in the 1640s and 50s. And we know that's when his style shifted to that rough, textured manner.
So the question is, was that stylistic change just an artistic choice? Was he just deciding to follow the path of an artist like Titian? Or was it something more? Is that thick, layered, almost wounded texture of the paint a direct reflection of his own weathered, burdened, but ultimately triumphant spirit? Is the physical texture of his late work inseparable from the emotional texture of his final years? The years he spent with nothing left but his genius, signing his name simply Rembrandt.